June 4th, 1942. Over the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, the U.S. Navy carrier force braces for a fight that will change the air war forever. Leading among them is Lieutenant Commander John Jimmy Thach, a calm, calculating airman whose inventive mind would soon rewrite the rules of aerial combat. The sleek Japanese fighters of the Mitsubishi A6M0 dominate the skies, agile, fast, deceptively deadly. Meanwhile, the American carrier fighter, the Grumman F4F Wildcat, is slower, heavier, and less nimble. Yet, in this unequal matchup, an audacious tactic, dismissed at first as a stupid trick, will enable the Wildcat to outfly the Zero and tip the balance. The Pacific War had raged for 6 months. Island after island fell under Japanese control. The Zero, lightweight and razor-precise, seemed unstoppable. It could climb faster, turn tighter, and outpace any Allied plane that dared to face it. American pilots who fought it head-on paid the price. They called it the white blur. By the time you saw it, it was already too late. The Grumman Wildcat, by comparison, was a brawler, not a dancer. Thick-skinned, underpowered, armed with 6.50 caliber guns. It was built to endure punishment, not outmaneuver its foe. In the early months, Wildcat squadrons were cut to pieces. Reports came in from Wake Island, Coral Sea, and early Pacific engagements. Zeros swarming like hornets, turning inside American fighters, gunning them down with ease. It seemed hopeless. But among those facing this impossible fight was Lieutenant Commander John Thach. He knew he couldn't make the Wildcat faster. He couldn't make it lighter, but maybe, just maybe, he could make it smarter. Thach began to study the problem the way a chess player studies his opponent. He read reports, debriefs, scraps of intelligence. The Zero, he learned, was astonishingly agile but fragile. It had no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It could twist in the air like a leaf, but a single burst in the wrong place would ignite it like tissue paper. And while it could outturn anything, it could not dive as fast or handle high-speed pressure. The Wildcat, for all its sluggishness, could dive like a rock and come back out intact. One night in his cabin, Thach placed 2 matchsticks on the table. Each one represented an airplane. Moving them back and forth, he worked through an idea. What if 2 slower fighters could help one another, using teamwork, not speed, to trap the enemy? He called it beam defense at first, but his pilots just called it that stupid trick with the weave. The concept was simple. 2 Wildcats fly side by side, about 200 meters apart. When a Zero comes in behind one, both turn toward each other, crossing paths. The Zero, chasing one, suddenly finds itself in front of the other. The hunted becomes the hunter. When he first explained it to his fellow pilots, some laughed. "You can't choreograph a dogfight," they said. "It's chaos up there." But Thach persisted. He practiced the maneuver over and over with his wingmen until it became instinct, a pattern, a rhythm, a dance of survival. Then came Midway. Thach and his men flew escort for slow-moving torpedo bombers, vulnerable targets heading straight into a storm of Japanese fighters. The call came, "Zeros! High and fast!" Thach's flight climbed to intercept. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The Zeros swooped in like hawks. Thach saw his wingman under attack and called out over the radio, "Weave!" Both Wildcats banked hard toward each other. The Zero followed the first Wildcat through the turn, straight into the gun sights of the second. Thach squeezed the trigger. The Zero erupted in flame. It fell in a spiral of smoke to the sea below. The maneuver worked again and again. The Zeros couldn't pin them down. Whenever they tried to turn in behind a Wildcat, they flew into a crossfire. The Americans moved like a single living thing. 2 planes, 1 purpose. By the end of that battle, the so-called stupid trick had proven to be a masterpiece of aerial tactics. The Thach Weave spread quickly through the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. Pilots practiced it religiously. It became the great equalizer. When Japanese pilots met Wildcats after Midway, they no longer found helpless targets. They found disciplined pairs of fighters that refused to be outflown. The Wildcat's rugged armor could take hits that would shred a Zero. Its machine guns, heavy and brutal, could rip through the unarmored fuselage of its opponent. The tide began to shift. What Thach understood was deeper than a single maneuver. He had changed the psychology of aerial combat. Before, the Americans fought reactively, turning and twisting, trying to match the Zero's movements. After the Weave, they fought proactively, luring the Zero into predictable patterns, forcing the fight into a geometry that favored teamwork over agility. It was no longer about who could turn tighter, it was about who could think faster. The brilliance of the Thach Weave lay not just in its mechanics, but in its simplicity. It required no special aircraft, no new technology, just trust between pilots. It made two planes into one weapon. The Wildcat, once an underdog, now had a way to fight back on its own terms. But this new tactic came with a mindset shift. American pilots had to resist their natural instincts. Dogfighting was about ego, staying about proving you could outfly your opponent. The Weave demanded humility. It demanded discipline. You had to rely on your partner to protect him while he protected you. It was teamwork in the purest sense, forged in the chaos of battle. As the months passed, more Wildcat pilots began using the Weave across the Pacific. Over Guadalcanal, the tactic saved lives again and again. Zeros would dive in, confident in their agility, only to find themselves boxed in by intersecting arcs of gunfire. The Japanese began to realize their advantage was slipping away. Reports from Zero pilots spoke of strange American maneuvers that made their attacks dangerous and unpredictable. Even as the newer Hellcat and Corsair replaced the Wildcat, the Thach Weave remained part of pilot training. It became standard doctrine, not only for naval aviators, but eventually for jet pilots as well. The idea of mutual support, of overlapping fields of defense, transcended aircraft design and became a cornerstone of aerial tactics. And yet the story of that trick goes beyond tactics. It's a story of adaptation, of turning weakness into strength. The Wildcat could not outturn or outclimb the Zero, but it could endure. It could take punishment and keep fighting. In that resilience lay its advantage. In the months following Midway, pilots began to refine the Weave further. They combined it with diving, slashing attacks, hit and run, high-speed passes that exploited the Zero's fragile frame. The Wildcat pilots learned to stay out of slow-turning fights, to use altitude as energy, to dive hard, shoot straight, and pull out before the Zero could react. It was warfare turned into science, an art of energy, timing, and teamwork. By late 1943, the kill ratio began to swing. Wildcats that once faced slaughter were now achieving multiple victories per loss. The myth of the invincible Zero began to fade. The Japanese still flew bravely, but their edge was gone. Their tactics, built on individual skill and agility, could not compete with the coordinated precision of American squadrons. Thach's idea, born from two matchsticks on a table, had changed the course of the air war. It wasn't technology that made the difference. It was human ingenuity. The Wildcat became a symbol of that, a stubby, unglamorous fighter that refused to die, flown by men who learned to think beyond the machine. Thach himself would go on to help design broader aerial doctrines for the U.S. Navy, influencing fighter tactics for decades. His stupid trick became required study material. Even modern pilots learn the principles behind it: teamwork, communication, geometry, anticipation, and perhaps that's the greatest legacy of the Wildcat versus the Zero. It showed that even when you are outclassed in performance, victory can come from creativity. The pilots who flew those Wildcats didn't just survive, they adapted. They turned a liability into an advantage. In war, every machine has limits. Every weapon has flaws. What separates success from failure is how those flaws are used, whether you allow them to define you or you redefine them. The Wildcat's story reminds us that courage alone is not enough. Courage must be paired with thought. The men who flew those bulky steel-plated planes prove that sometimes the simplest idea can change everything. What began as a desperate experiment turned into a doctrine that saved hundreds of lives and shifted the balance of air power. From that day over Midway onward, the Zero was no longer the hunter. It was the hunted. The legend of the Wildcat endures not because it was the best plane, but because it embodied the spirit of problem-solving under fire. It was proof that innovation is born from necessity, that even the stupidest idea can become genius when lives depend on it. And so, in the skies above the Pacific, two planes danced a deadly weave. Proof that intellect could triumph over instinct, that teamwork could overcome technology, and that a humble fighter could outfly the most feared machine in the world. The ocean below was littered with burning wreckage, but in that inferno, a lesson was written in smoke. Never underestimate the power of a good idea. The Battle of Midway would become a turning point, but not just because of strategy or surprise. It was because of people like Lieutenant Commander John Thach, who refused to accept defeat, who believed that brains could balance the scales against brawn. The Wildcats' courage, the pilot's discipline, and one so-called stupid trick together rewrote the rules of air combat. The war would rage on for 3 more brutal years, with newer aircraft rising and old ones fading. But the echo of that day, the sight of 2 Wildcats crossing paths under fire, outsmarting a faster foe, would live on. In every fighter squadron, in every manual, in every pilot's instinct to cover his wingman, the spirit of the Thach Weave endures. And in that enduring pattern of motion, in that dance of survival born over the Pacific, lies the truth that defined an era. Technology wins battles, but ingenuity wins wars.